So, if you were once a tween or early teenager, you know that Diary of a Wimpy Kid was that book series that mostly everyone read in school. Specifically boys, but I think a lot of girls did as well. I believe it was because we could relate a lot to it. From Greg always being unlucky to him getting in strange predicaments. This inspired people to create their own fanfics based on the series, with extremely interesting topics to say the least. One of them follows Greg 25 years later in his life, to another that has Greg exploring the dark web and getting himself into trouble with the underworld. So without further ado, let's get into my 7 favorite Diary of a Wimpy Kid fanfics that are extremely dark, weird, and unique. Also, be sure to subscribe and leave a like, as it helps support my channel a lot. 25 years later. The story starts 25 years later after all the events in the series have occurred, in the year 2032. Greg explains that he hasn't written in the diary since he was a kid, finding it underneath a stack of paperwork. Inspired to write in it once again, he gives us an update on Rowley, explaining that he moved to Boston, living there for 7 years now, and how they haven't spoken since he left. Greg now works in an office downtown, alongside Bryce Anderson, a character you may recall from the series, expressing his indecisive feelings about it. Then he catches us up on his family's whereabouts. Roderick still lives in Plainville, while Manny decided to move to New York in his 20s, saying that their family has yet to forgive him without giving any context as to why, being extremely vague. Also, Roderick is married and has a kid. As for his parents, they remain in the same house. He then speaks on his love life, and how he's never really considered settling down like his brother Roderick, as he's never actually been in a serious relationship before. He considers using being busy with work as an excuse, but acknowledges that it never really follows him home. Greg then goes into existential crisis mode, asking why he never gets his way, and how he has nobody to talk to, even his at one time best friend Rowley. Going further into detail, he tells us what occurred 7 years ago between them. They both ended up going to the same college and moving to the same neighborhood afterward. While Greg applied for a job at the company that created his favorite video game Twisted Wizard, Rowley managed to get his Zooey Mama comics in the local newspaper. This garnished the interest of a comic syndicate in Boston, offering Rowley a full-time job if he moved there. This ultimately devastated Greg. Not only that, the video game company denied his application. In one last-ditch effort to keep him from moving away, Greg decided to tell Rowley how he really felt about him, confessing his romantic love. Rowley didn't acknowledge it though, and leaves without saying anything, causing Greg to drive to Boston and confront him. But it doesn't end well. The story then jumps to the present time, where Greg has to confront his dad's death, parting due to cancer, remembering the time that he tried to come out to his dad, but he had a negative response. Standing on his grave alongside Manny, for some reason, Manny decided to take out a lit match and set his tombstone on fire. I'll cut to the chase. In the end, Greg decides that life isn't worth living anymore and jumps off a 5-story building, being put on life support for days and then pronounced dead. Or so we think. Here's the last page of the story if you want to read it. Greg's No Nuts November. Supposedly, this fanfic was so messed up that it ended up getting removed from the Loaded Diapers subreddit, and after reading it, I kinda see why. So in the story, Greg's entire family competes in the No Nuts November challenge imposed by Susan Hifley. Normally, Greg would lose early on, getting caught jerking it to Holly's Instagram pictures, but this November he's feeling a bit determined, as the grand prize is an infinite nut pass, allowing the holder to bust unlimited nuts without consequence. His dad is the first person to lose the challenge, and his uncles followed. Greg has a close call when he pops a chub during swimming class, when he sees Holly in a revealing swimsuit, causing his classmates to poke fun at him throughout the day. With 13 days remaining, for some reason, Manny decides to take his own life due to losing the challenge because a classmate used a vacuum on his wee-wee. I'm trying to keep it PG-13 here, so I'm gonna skip this weird part where there's a shootout and tons of people die. Long story short though, Greg, Roderick, and Uncle Gary are the last ones left in the competition. Everyone else is dead or just simply lost the challenge. Here are some crazy screenshots of the story if you want to check it out. Take time to pause for this, I guess. Yeah, this shit's for degenerates and 12-year-olds. Greg turns out to be the last man standing, until his mom reveals that she has a wee-wee herself, and is a serial killer. Yeah, I don't know how it got to this. Greg ends up killing the serial killer, aka his own mom, and wins the infinite nut pass at the end. But at what cost? Go check it out yourself for some more information, as it's way more detailed. The Dark Web Trilogy. In this trilogy, Greg's attention is caught by Albert Sandy's rant about how you could make tons of money off the dark web by completing crazy tasks, though it does come with eerie consequences, like being killed or kidnapped. The first thing Greg does when getting on a dark web website is to find out the easiest way to make money, and one of them is by selling someone on the black market. The first person that came to Greg's mind was Manny, making an easy 15 racks for him, replacing him with Chirag Gupta for the time being. After flexing his cash during lunch period, he asks Albert Sandy for more advice about the dark web. His next plan was to secretly livestream Rowley's room without his consent, bugging the place with cameras, bringing his next sum of cash to $50,000. He's happy until he realized money can't buy him everything, in particular Holly's attention, so he decides to take her forcefully by ordering kidnappers to bring her to him. This ends up scaring Greg, leaving her outside in a trash bag. The next day, he forgets to bring her in, and she ends up being taken by the garbage truck. Rest in peace, Holly, I guess. After getting freaked out, he decides to throw the towel in and stop his business. This gets his main buyer mad, which results in him being kidnapped and taken to a dark web headquarters full of drugs and slaves. It turns out Albert Sandy was behind it all and was using Greg as a recruit, asking Greg if he wanted to work for him. Greg declined though, which was a bad idea, as he wrote his own death sentence, though he convinces the slave not to kill him and instead escape the place with him, blowing up the headquarters. They both agree and ditch the place. Fast forward, Greg is once again taken against his will and confronted by Albert Sandy, who was able to survive the explosion. This time Albert was going to torture Greg, cutting off his legs with a saw. Atomic Age. It's January 2018, and Greg notices the power went out while on his computer, though the backup generator quickly comes on. When going downstairs to check the rest of his house's electricity, the television was playing a scary emergency announcement. The news reported that there had been a nuclear attack on the country, with several major cities being targeted. The government began to evacuate people from surrounding areas due to concerns of radiation poisoning, though everyone at home was safe. Greg's dad, who worked in the city, barely made it out, with minor burns and scratches on his body. The government had also announced that all the fresh food and water had been contaminated, and that they would have to try to bring in supplies into town. Believing that Uncle Gary most likely didn't survive the Boston attack, they held a funeral for him, where Greg complained that there were too many people. After that, a doctor came to look at Greg's dad, concluding that he was suffering from radiation poisoning, as his hair was falling out and his wounds weren't healing at all. A few days later, he had passed away from the damage. After the large surrounding cities were destroyed, Plainview, Greg's hometown, had a migrant crisis, with people setting up camp in the parks and streets. SCFs were also set up to house those refugees as well. This put a drain on their supply. A few months later, shrines to commemorate those who died in the bombings were set up around Greg's school. Somehow, the story deals with racism and the Middle East conflict, but I'll leave it up to you to read the rest and find out why. For some reason, the story gets really emotional about race relations in America. This story is way tamer than the average fanfic, but I suggest that you check it out. Greg browses Rule 34. In this story, Greg finds out about something called hentai. Most of my viewers most likely already know what it is, but if you don't, search it up at your own discretion. So Greg, being as innocent as he is, he believes that it's a television show or something like that, and plans to stream it illegally since he doesn't have access to any subscription services. In order to do this, he asks Lionel for a website that would allow him to stream it for free, but instead of getting a direct response, he bursts into laughter and snitches on Greg to the teacher. This gets him into trouble, having to stay after class for a speech, where the teacher says this. Yeah, I don't know where this long spiel came from. Pause right now if you want to read it. Greg ends up getting a lead on the best website to check out all these quote-unquote hentai shows and proceeds to invite Rowley to spend all night watching them alongside him. They both get ready and search up the Rule 34 website together, expecting nothing but free access to shows and other media. Little did they know their childhoods were about to be ruined or blessed, depending on your preference. After getting traumatized, they gain Roderick and his bandmates' respect for searching up something called Shadman, which I'm personally oblivious to what it is. Anyways, Roderick and Greg get into a scuffle after Roderick shows them the more tamer side of Rule 34 that contains popular childhood characters because it took away their innocence or something like that. Anyways, this gets Greg extremely mad, which causes them to fight. This catches the attention of their mom, who barges towards their room, causing everyone to sneak out of there. Somehow they get away just in time, with the Rule 34 tab being closed and a YouTube video being played instead. His mom proceeds to ask him to turn it down, and he gets away with it all. Although something strange happens, his computer comes to life as a waifu. Or so we think, as he was just hallucinating. This fanfiction mirrors the I Am Legend movie plot. The story starts with Greg telling us that something strange is going on in town, authorities advising people to not go outside at night. Manny's acting strange, and around 9 PM the electricity goes out, leaving them in the cold and dark. They also hear what sounds like Susan Hifley, the mom of the house, banging on the door to let her in, although their mom was inside the room, right beside them already, creeping them out. This has been going on for about a week now. Roderick has locked himself inside of his room, and Manny stays in the treehouse, providing dead squirrels for Greg and Rowley to distract the creatures at night with, not questioning where Manny gets all of the dead squirrels. Oh yeah, Rowley doesn't know where his parents are, so he's staying with Greg for now. One night, the moon was unexpectedly bright, so much so that it agitated the creatures outside, forcing Rowley and Greg to lock themselves inside of the bathroom. Everything was feeling safe until they heard knocking on the bathroom door. It was his mom, saying how beautiful the moonlight was, getting more and more aggressive about it, and saying that they needed to reveal themselves to it. The following day, she was gone, and so was the car. Luckily, Roderick finally came out of his room. He didn't look all too good though, as he had a burn on his arm due to the moonlight. Greg then notices something extremely off about Manny. He's acting as if everything is normal, though he does enjoy sitting down and watching the television while it's not even on. Sadly, Roderick dies a few days later due to his burn and constant scratching and grinding away at his own skin. His arm falls off and continues to crawl towards them. This freaks Rowley and Greg out, causing them to get in Roderick's van and leave the place, deciding to go to their school, where they find more survivors that let him in and are given a place to sleep in the gym, paralleling the I Am Legend ending. The sun vanished. The story begins in July, with Greg waking up at 1:25 PM and it's still being dark outside. Cold and scared, he asks his parents, who are downstairs, what's going on. This is when he sees the television screen, with the news headline reading that the sun had vanished. As Greg's mom cried while holding Manny and his father having a blank face, not knowing what to do. Roderick, on the other hand, was packing his things frantically and stated that he was leaving to start a new life, offering Greg to go with him, but he didn't accept his offer, as he had other things in mind, believing that hitting the road and looting stores alongside Rowley would be a much better time. Rowley gladly accepted, as his parents said that they were going to eat his flesh if they ran out of food anytime soon, so they both snuck away, coming across something unsettling while doing so though, seeing a bright object in the sky chasing a person down the street. Rowley also decided to invite two strangers that volunteered as help for their mission, which threw Greg off a little bit as he didn't know them too well. They all proceeded to follow Greg into his treehouse, where they set up a plan on what they wanted to do, with narcissistic Greg announcing himself the leader before anyone else could. While arguing, they hear a creature outside coming towards them. And that was it. Those were my 7 favorite Diary of a Wimpy Kid fanfics I found. If you want to see more of these type of videos where I cover other types of fanfics, drop a like, subscribe, or just let me know if you want to see more of these Diary of a Wimpy Kid fanfics, or even reading one. Catch you guys later though. Thanks.